Okay, it's 7:02, and I don't want to misuse anybody's time. I'll be letting people in all along. I know some of you, I recognize a lot of faces, but for those of you I don't know, my name is Juanita Ray. I work with the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust, and I work with Karen Claich with teacher workshop and planning and work like that. And I'm actually here tonight just facilitating. I'm going to be keeping up with the attendance and helping manage the program. Actually, we have a group of teachers who are going to be working tonight to run this particular webinar. If you have questions, please put them in the chat box, and the teachers and myself will be monitoring those questions, especially if you have questions for Renee. As we go through this presentation. At the end of this part of the presentation, then we'll do an overview of what's left for this through December for the council, some of the work that we're still doing for the rest of the year, and then a way that you can evaluate this particular webinar. So I'm going to turn this over to Amy Clark, and Amy's going to guide you guys through this process, and I'm here if you have any questions for council side. Thank you.
Hey everyone, welcome. We are so glad that you were able to join us tonight for a special program with Renee Fink. Renee and I have been talking for a couple of months now, and her story is just remarkable, and I think we're all going to benefit from hearing her speak tonight through video and in person. I'm working with 3 other folks that have planned this program. Jared, if you want to wave and say hello. Jared Spate from Region 8, and then of course Renee and Lori Jones, if you want to wave, and Stacy Dotson, and she'll be doing some of the Q&A at the end. I'm a retired media coordinator. I live in McDowell County in lovely Marion, North Carolina. We had a beautiful fall day today. I hope everybody else was able to enjoy the beautiful day today. I also work for the council as the Western Region Exhibit Coordinator, and I don't know if any of you have had exhibits in your school or not. If you haven't, they're wonderful. We would love to get resources to you. So at the very end, maybe we'll be able to show you the council's website. You can go on and look and see who your region exhibit coordinator is and contact us so that we can bring museum experience to your school. I know Carrie in Watauga County is hosting the Kinder Transport right now, and it's just a wonderful way to engage your students in your community. So a little plug there for the council's exhibits. We are so grateful to have Renee join us tonight and tell her story of her hidden child during the Holocaust. We're going to use a video format. Renee recorded her story on 4 video segments, and they're titled "On the Back of a Stranger's Bicycle," and you'll be able to understand the significance of that title as you go deeper into each segment. The videos are about 23 to 24 minutes long. And during the course of the videos, if you have questions, just put them in the chat, and we'll have someone at the end circle back around and pose those questions to Renee, and she'll have some final thoughts for us and some comments. But thank you. We're so very grateful to you, Renee, for joining us tonight and sharing your story. I do want to formally introduce Renee. She had a bio posted on the Holocaust Speakers Bureau, and I see Sharon. Hey, Sharon. Wonderful organization that curates speakers to come and speak virtually or in person as COVID permits. We all know we've lived through COVID the past 2 years, but it's a wonderful organization out of the Triangle area, and Renee is part of that Speakers Bureau. So I would like to just formally introduce Renee, and if you'll indulge me, I'm going to put on my glasses and read her bio so you can get to know her a little better. Born in the Netherlands, Renee Fink went into hiding at the age of 4. She was fortunate in being able to stay with a Catholic Dutch family until after the war ended, when she was 8. Reunited with her grandmother, they lived in another Dutch town until she came to the US with her grandmother in 1948. Sadly, Renee and her grandmother were unable to live together, and she was sent to yet another family in the Adirondack Mountains. Although Renee had to live in an occupied and heavily bombed part of Holland during World War II, she shares with students why those times got to be her best years until she married. In her talks, Renee likes to stress the resistance, goodness, and courage of people in those times and why those traits remain so important. When speaking to school children, she shares a DVD created by the Holocaust Speakers Bureau of Chapel Hill, North Carolina, that provides a good overview of the Holocaust and deals specifically with what was happening in Holland and with Renee. Renee has spoken to students from 5th grade through university, as well as to adult groups. She has been the keynote speaker at the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust's annual commemoration and the Catawba Valley Interfaith Council. Renee has spoken at Duke University, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, community colleges in various North Carolina counties, women's groups, church groups, retirement communities, and more. Renee is often invited to address educators at teacher symposia and workshops. She has been the featured guest on UNC TV and WUNC Radio, The State of Things. Homeschooled children and their parents invite Renee to speak regularly. And the last part of this bio says that in April 2017, Renee visited Washington, D.C. and addressed federal employees at a Yom HaShoah commemoration. So she's very active in telling her story. And like I said, we are just so thankful and grateful to you that you could be here to share your story with us tonight. If you would please remember to keep yourself on mute during the videos, we'll go ahead and start with the first one. And again, they're titled On the Back of a Stranger's Bicycle. And we'll go through all 4 and do a Q&A at the end.
I was born in December of 1937 in Scheveningen, Holland, also known as the Netherlands. My parents and my entire family was German. They were all from Breslau, Germany, which today in the 21st century is Poland. And we lived in Scheveningen, which is a beautiful seaside town right by The Hague, until all the Jewish aliens were moved inland. They were not trusted to be on coastal areas for, I guess, purposes of espionage. My family was forced by the Germans to move inland from Scheveningen, and we moved to Bilthoven, which is in the province of North Holland. In 1940, on May 10th, when the Germans invaded Holland and the Dutch capitulated on the 14th, life was not as drastically changed for the Jews, but little by little, all our freedoms were taken away. We could not practice professions. Lawyers couldn't be lawyers, doctors couldn't be doctors, children could not go to public school. We were lower than dogs or cockroaches, so we were not allowed in public places or parks. We couldn't shop for groceries or for necessary things except for very prescribed hours during the day. But by that time, all the goods would be gone virtually. And at that time, things became extremely bad and dangerous for Jews. We either had to go into hiding or be picked up in what were called razzias, the raids. There was a theater in Amsterdam, so when the Germans raided, Jews were gathered and sent to this theater, and children were placed in what was called a creche across the street. And there are many, many stories about what happened in these two places. But the Dutch underground was extremely active, and proportionately there were, if you keep in mind that Holland was such a small country, there were more what is called righteous among the nations or righteous Christians than in a lot of other countries. We were going on a percentage basis, not in numbers. And at the same time, there were a tremendous number of collaborators known as NSBers who were very sympathetic to all things German and were more than eager to work with the Germans. For a small country, it was a dichotomy, and there was a lot going on, and with the help of the underground, which may be more commonly known as the resistance, 2 hiding places were found. I mean, I went into one short hiding place, which I know nothing about, and then the Van der Brink family was found, and we stayed together for the duration of the war. There are books written about what motivated the righteous Christians in Holland. This family was Catholic, and they had a very strong idea of humility and doing the right thing. And for them, it wasn't very complicated. That is the only way that the 2 people I came to call Mama and Papa, and they were Mama and Papa Van der Brink, looked at the world. It was the only right thing for them to do, and they were in total disregard of any danger it would pose to them and 8 of their children. And it posed, I mean, to say great danger is such an understatement. They were all risking their lives to place even one little person like me for whatever length of time I ended up being there. So imagine if they did the right thing. They had no idea if it would be a week or a month or 6 months, and it ended up being from 1942 until well into 1945, May 4th. I came to the house one day on the back of a stranger's bicycle. I didn't know who the stranger was. I did not have the first inkling of why I was on her bicycle. Neither would I have ever realized until I was older what it meant to my parents to see me off on this bicycle with a very nice woman who obviously was one of the underground workers. So I came. I don't know if it took many hours for the trip. I don't remember those details at 4. Knowledge was dangerous. And that's why, going back to the woman who took me on her bicycle, knowing now the way the underground worked, everybody was a cog, a tiny cog in a very large machine. And for them not to know anything beyond what they were doing, whether it was delivering a child from one address to another, or printing a flyer, or doing any number of hundreds of jobs. They were tiny jobs, and that person only knew what he was doing, and everybody had false names. And you couldn't give anyone away. So after I got to this house, there were no more explanations, and I was just kind of in some kind of a survival mode, and I lost my tongue and my appetite, and I was very homesick. I grew to love every one of these brothers, 5 brothers and 3 sisters. There was a lot of love going on in that house, but in a very stoic, non-demonstrative way. In the province of North Holland, it was a very heavily occupied area with Germans all around. And the Germans kept such incredible records that they knew who was Jewish and who wasn't. Holland was such a topsy-turvy place. You know, after the bombing of Rotterdam between the 10th and the 14th of May in 1940, there were a lot of non-Jewish people also displaced because they had been bombed out of their houses, and everything was flattened, raised. So you had people looking for shelter and Jewish people on the run looking for hiding places and Germans coming and making house searches. So where I lived, they were constantly searching. I was Jewish and I was putting everyone at terrible risk. And their sons were conscript material. They were the age when the Germans would have taken them. And then, in addition to those major fears, the Germans took whatever they wanted. And if you were caught with a radio or anything that was contraband, you were in grave danger too. There was a little bit of panic each time. And I think they really had to get rid of me into some little corner of the house. So with enough warning, I was tossed into a bed upstairs in one of the bedrooms and covered me up with blankets. And my hair got covered that way. And it wouldn't raise questions about my appearance. And they would point to me and start coughing and saying TB, which is the same TB, whether it's Dutch or German, it's the European alphabet. And the Germans ran. It never failed. They ran. But we didn't always have a lot of time when they came. And so I don't know why, but there was a dunce cap in the house. And they kind of tossed me into a corner downstairs and put this dunce cap on me. It was a great big thing. And they would just go like that and point to me. And again, my hair was covered up because in some cases, Jewish children had their hair dyed so that they looked a little bit more Christian if they were not looking like the family. But I got to keep my natural color hair. I only had my religion and my names changed. I was very homesick. And I thought about them a lot. So I never stopped missing my parents, and I never got answers after the war ended about them. My family went into hiding, and they were betrayed. My aunt and my grandmother were hiding, and they were on the run. And they spent some time on the run together, and then they separated. My aunt and my uncle were working in the underground. My uncle said to my aunt at one time, "We're dead either way, so we might as well make our lives count for something and join the underground." So they did that. But my parents went into hiding together and they were betrayed. I'm telling you about my grandmother's visit. One year while I was in hiding and she was on the run, she must have been in the east of Holland at that particular time. And she spent 2 nights walking in the dark and hiding in the day so that she wouldn't be picked up. You were not free and you had to have ID papers and certainly you couldn't be Jewish without being picked up and being sent to the camps. So she appeared on my birthday. She didn't stay long, but it was unforgettable. I remember going to bed hungry every night, and along with missing my parents was just wishing for food and thinking a lot about being hungry. And so we had some fake foods like bread. Now, I call it ersatz bread, but it may be better known as wartime or fake bread, just like ersatz coffee. Not that I would have had coffee of any sort, but every day we must have had a loaf of something that was called bread. And every night I went to bed thinking, and keep in mind, it was always exactly cut into the number of family members. 11 of us, 11 equal slices. And somehow the heel was seemed a little thicker. And so we each got our turn at the heel of the bread, and I would go to bed at night thinking, tomorrow it's my turn to get the heel. There were people starving, and they came endless knocks on the door with people begging for food just to survive. And every time there was a knock, my oldest Catholic sister answered and gave something to whoever was begging for food. And this went on for a long time, and they always shared. Now, modesty and humility were a big part, so I know we shared proudly, but it was never mentioned. But I know very well what was going on because it was all visible. And then came the day there were knocks at the door. And Zus, who was the oldest sister, didn't answer because we didn't have food to share. That would have had to be, I'm guessing now, what was known in Holland as the hunger winter, and that was the winter of 1944. It was one of the coldest winters, and the food supplies really run out. And my family was reduced to eating flour mixed with water. And sometimes we had smushed or mashed up tulip bulbs, and we ate that. I wasn't aware of being Jewish, but when I came to the Van der Brinks, I got a new name, a new identity, a new family, and I became a Catholic instantly. And I learned the rosary, and I went to church, and I crossed myself. And there were holy water basins on the door jambs of each bedroom. So, I mean, we dipped our hands in holy water. I was devout. It was a devout family, and God was watching not only my every action, but my every thought. God was in my head. It was a fearful kind of religion in those days, especially in Holland, because we didn't celebrate Christmas other than in a strictly Christian way. All Jewish children who went into hiding had a tendency to be very obedient and very quiet and not make waves. And somehow we knew that. So I was a very good little Catholic. The fact that I appeared suddenly in this town, in this household, must have been a source of constant fear. Your neighbors could turn you in. Those were days we lived with fear on a level that is not easily explained. So when I say they risk their lives every day, anyone could have turned them in at any time. And that's one reason they took their chances. They did it. They took me in. But they couldn't send me to public school. That would have raised a lot of questions. Church, I guess, wasn't an option. We did it. But I never got to go to school. I never learned to read or write. I'm going to tell you a little about different ways of hiding. My hiding experience was true for me. Other children were also hidden. Some went from house to house. Many were abused physically, sexually. They were made into little slaves. I mean, there are horror stories about hiding. They didn't all get families like I was so incredibly fortunate. There wasn't always space. My hiding was what I personally call a kind of open hiding, because Anne Frank comes to the minds of many people. Her story is so familiar. And she was in what I call a closed hiding, never to be seen or heard by anyone outside those walls. I could go outside at certain times, yet one of my brothers used to think back and feel sorry for me that I didn't get to leave, come and go in the house as freely. But I personally don't remember that. But other children were hidden either in very cramped quarters. sometimes little babies were pushed into bureau drawers, just closed if there was a danger of being discovered. Others hid in barns, in haystacks. People were hiding in sewer systems in cities in Poland, like Warsaw and Łódź. But they were hiding behind artificial walls that were constructed. One of my friends was thrown into a coal bin underneath all the coal at the age of 2, his parents hoping he would be discovered in time, because Germans would come and poke with bayonets. Other children were thrown out of moving trains when possible, thinking that was no worse than certain death. And some frantic Jewish parents carrying infants had offered them to other people on the street or in the train station, just desperately. Hiding children were very good and very quiet and very well behaved. And sometimes when some parents paid money to families to take their children. That's one of the very special qualities, again, about the Van der Brinks. They did not do this for money, but in too many cases there was money involved, not only Holland, but especially in the East. And when money ran out, children got kicked out into the street. And there are some pretty awful stories about little children on the run and feral children running in the woods. But since Holland didn't have caves and woods, we didn't have that kind of children on the run. That was Poland and Russia. After the war, I want to make it clear that in the case of child survivors, in a lot of cases, our lives fell apart at the end, after the war, in the years afterwards. And I think for us, the toughest part of our lives was surviving survival. And my grandmother knew where I was, so we reunited. Eventually, I desperately wanted to stay with the Van der Brinks, but I went and lived with my beloved grandmother, and then before I knew it, I was told that we were going to America. I can easily respond to any questions about deniers and revisionists. Don't forget revisionists. And the Germans, we have the Germans to thank for the best argument to deniers and revisionists. They kept impeccable records. They were crazy for making all the details, all the numbers, all the timetables of the trains. That was a Germanic thing, all these details. And if that's not good enough for people, then we can thank General Eisenhower for having his soldiers document through film and still photography what they found in the camps. There are all sorts of records, and I think this is a large reason that we, survivors, are speaking. And I can say to students, if you come across such people, tell them you've met me.
that truly is a remarkable story. And we do have a couple of questions. But before I start the questions, is there anything that you want to say before we start questions?
Thought I would take just a couple of minutes. I don't want to take away from your Q&A time, but I like to, first of all, I just want to say the governor signed the budget bill today, and that is all I will say about it. And in the coming days, it will become abundantly clear why I and all of you will rejoice over this. But that's for others to explain. And then I just wanted to say that I feel it's very important for me to talk, whether it's to students or with teachers, but to more have a conversation than for me to speak. So I like to keep it very informal, but I think it's very necessary for people like me to speak and to explore how the Holocaust is relevant today. It is not about, oh, I was such a pitiful little girl. This is not the point of talking about it. It's to understand history, not to repeat it better, but to know the danger signs and to become more aware. And for those who have only known life in a free country and enjoyed its freedom, how can we fully understand the meaning of living in a democracy? I think I took it for granted being an American citizen, a proud American citizen. And today we are discovering how fragile our democracy is. And it's very frightening to me, people like me, and to many of you. It was so threatened, it was so fragile, and we learned how easily it could be overturned, and almost was. And some of us realize what an effort it takes on all our parts to keep our democracy intact. So I feel I have a lot of messages. Democracy is one. And I also like to think that when I'm speaking, I like to be the voice for the 1.5 million children and infants who were outright murdered in various horrifying ways. Also, it's coming more and more to light that hidden children, we as a group, I didn't even know what I was. I just thought I had an unusual life and never talked about it. But now we find that many of us who were hidden were very apologetic about that because we weren't camp survivors, and we felt the guilt of not having suffered as much as camp survivors. This is all being turned on its head today. The findings are that hidden children suffered a great deal. Those of us who survived, oh, and by the way, only 6 to 7% of Jewish children survived the Holocaust. This is not Holland, this is the entire European region. 67% survived, all the others murdered. So we are now recognized, we carry a lot of baggage, but there's another message, and that is about resistance. And however, whether we were hidden children or camp survivors, we all resisted in some form or another. We resisted just by living another day. And I thought we need to realize that resistance is the opposite of standing by. Bystanders made the Holocaust
possible with their silence, which can be construed as implicit approval. And we resisted in many ways, but that's an entirely different topic. And I'm not going to take any more time other than what teachers seem to love is when I warn against the 4 I's, and I think teachers are using this as a tool, and the 4 I's are ignorance, indifference, intolerance, and injustice. I survived because of the courage of others, and that's another message. And I'll leave it to you.
Thank you. I love the 4 I's. That is definitely a teaching tool that
Yeah.
I'm sure people here can use. Thank you for sharing that.
You can use your own order, but I think it starts with ignorance.
I think it does too. So let's get to a couple of these questions. Had a question wanting to know how were you able to preserve those photographs that you still have of your family members?
There were many wonderful Christians in Holland, and I'm only speaking about Holland now. And there was a lady called Mevrouw Ritter, and she was friendly with my my grandmother and my aunt, and she offered to take certain things that belonged to my family. They dug a hole in her garden and buried all of these things. So many of the pictures have damp marks. You know, the weather in Holland is pretty lousy, but this way I am very rich in having these photos.
Very much so. Another question asked, are you still in contact with any of the brothers and sisters that you lived with while in Holland?
I am. Now, I suddenly one day got 8 brothers and sisters, and it took me a while to resume contact, and my husband really encouraged me. And so I wrote that first letter, and since that letter, it's been the most wonderful, the most exciting, heartwarming thing that anyone could imagine. I have this fabulous family, and we loved each other. And sadly, of course, my brothers and sisters have died, each in different ways. Some quite young, some not so young, but only one brother is still alive, and he's quite ill. 3 of the boys went to Australia and had, between 3 sons, they had 25 children. They were devout Catholics. One alone had 13 children. So I have been, many of my siblings, my Catholic siblings, have come and stayed with us in America. And I have gone to visit there, and they had a family reunion, and it is in the wonderful book put out by the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. And there's even a picture of my family reunion in Holland in that book. We adore each other, and I now have gotten very close to some of my nieces. And somehow I would be just as close, just as easily close with nephews, but my sisters had mostly girls. So they range. It's a family comprising so many different ways of earning a living. Some are working people, some are carpenters, farmers, house cleaners, all the way up to an ambassador.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that is awesome. Incredible. I had another question on our chat that asked, you mentioned that you were reunited with your grandmother. How did that come about? Because your grandmother was on the run and hiding herself, and then how did y'all end up back together?
My grandmother, in some way, she must have found out from my mother where I was. And in the video, it does. I want to thank Jared, also, all of you, Amy, Juanita, Stacy, every one of you for making it possible, and Jared overcoming the soundless video. But as you heard in that, my grandmother did visit me. So she knew where I was, and was after the war. Bless you. I was staying with my Catholic family somewhat after the war ended in Holland, which was May 4th. I didn't leave right away because everyone had to pick up the pieces of their lives. So eventually I went to live with my grandmother in that horrible little house with toadstools growing all over my bedroom walls. Holland is cold and damp, and we were very cold. And every day we went into the forest, my grandmother and I, into the woods and gathered mushrooms so we would have something to eat. And it was great. Living with my grandmother was great. And I had girlfriends and we played on the street, and I began to go to school.
Wow. Okay. We did have someone comment. This is Sharon Halperin, says, thank you, Renee. I never tire of listening to your story. Your message is important today more than ever, and you deliver it eloquently. So,
thank you.
Other questions? Anybody else have a question that you would like to ask Renee? And while I'm waiting a moment to see if anybody types in the chat, I do want to thank Jared for overcoming, like Renee said, the YouTube issues. That was great, because I probably would have been panicking and crying in a corner somewhere. So thank you, Jared. I appreciate that. Let's see. It says, we have a question that says, it must have been costly to come to the U.S. after the war. How were you able to get enough money to come and live to America, or to come and live in America? What was the issue with y'all actually immigrating to the United States?
It was not easy. We could not enter the United States. We had to wait for all kinds of papers to come through. And this took 3 years, I would guess, 2.5 to 3 years. You must have a sponsor, someone who takes financial responsibility, so that you will not be a responsibility of the American government. You have to have all your I's dotted and all your T's crossed, and then you can worry about the fare or whatever the ship costs. Again, my grandmother had a friend who was, when she still had a husband, who was their best friend. And this man survived the war and lost all his money. Of course, he lost everything, but he maintained his life. And after the war, he again began to be somewhat successful, and he actually bought our passage. It was just my grandmother and me. And then my grandmother left me with a new family, and then my life fell apart, which is typical for child survivors. It's not just me. Some had parents who survived, and the parents came to claim their children eventually when they found each other, but they were not the same parents who had left the children, and the children didn't recognize them. And often the children had to become the parents because the parents, in some cases, were severely traumatized or physically traumatized, and it wasn't easy for those who still had parents.
Right.
And for those of us who didn't have parents, it was one hell or another, depending on who you lived with. And I happen to have been pretty abused, but not physically. I was never physically abused, but emotional abuse can be pretty bad. So,
speaking of another issue where it could have been bad, I have a question on our chat from Sarah Sturdivant wanting to know your experience going to school once you arrived in the United States. Did your fellow classmates have any idea or understanding of what you experienced in Holland? How was it coming to America and being enrolled in school?
It's very funny if you think about it, and very lucky, because my family experience may have been a torture, but the town people, you have to understand, the town was at the very most, including all the outlying areas, consisted of about 200 people. So it was smaller than the small village, and nothing ever happened. I mean, sometimes somebody murdered somebody else over a woman, but you know, that was not a usual thing. But when I came to town, they must have been talking about a child who was going to come and live among them. And in school, I didn't speak English. And I learned it very quickly because the teacher gave me so much attention. And the other children, this was an area where there were lumberjacks, and there was a lot of drinking and a lot of family strife and a lot of kids dropping out of school when they were 16. So, you know, not much happened there, and life was difficult. So I was kind of the news event, and everyone tried to outdo the other by being nice to me. And this is why I think I have to thank this town, because it was such a feel-good thing for me. And I had to learn English immediately. And in about 6 weeks, I was speaking, I guess, part English, part Dutch, a little mishmash, but I was getting along. So I was lucky with the town, and I loved the people, and they seemed to really show me love, and it helped.
Wow. That I'm very thankful that you had that experience, especially since your home life was not the best that it could have been. So I'm glad you did have that positive in your life then. Anyone else have a question for Renee? Waiting to see if anybody types anything, Renee.
Sure.
Okay, well, I guess so. We do have another here. You described your experience as being in, quote, open hiding and being able to go outside sometimes. Did you ever meet anyone with similar circumstances?
No, I have met, I have gone, oh, am I breaking up? I've gone to hidden child conferences. It's not coming across. Is it coming through very poorly?
It is now. It is now.
It's okay.
Yes.
In 1991, there was a Hidden Child Conference in New York, and I didn't know that my experience had a name. And I ended up going to this. I was very frightened. And 1,600, we call ourselves children, came from all around the world. It was an international conference, and it's very much written about. And the news media were really doing a lot. But we didn't watch the news, we were living it. And in that conference, I didn't meet anyone who had my experience. I met some of the people I spoke about, no, all of the people I spoke about, and their hiding experiences have been good friends of mine. One girl was thrown out of a train, and she was really injured, never walked normally, but she survived. Another one ended up taking care of her mother after the war because her mother was a mess, and that's all she had. So her life was very difficult. My friend Phil was thrown in the coal bin, and they wrote a little story about him. I can't use all the language, but he was covered with coal inside and out. And then one of my very close friends was hiding, but with his parents, in a chicken coop. So we all had very different experiences. Many children, and the one who was in the bureau drawer was a tiny baby. So if the Germans came, they had to close the drawer because a baby could give you away. And the other day I heard of two families who were hiding for 2 years behind an organ in a church. And wow. One of the women gave birth to a baby. The baby was immediately given away. You know, there were underground or resistance fighters protecting people. Like in the case of Anne Frank, someone had to protect them and bring them food, and had to get food ration stamps and go through. These things were not easy. It was with enormous help of other people, Christians and Jews alike, throughout the Holocaust. But there were so many different experiences.
Right. We had a comment from April that said she just wanted to say your story is truly amazing and she appreciates all your wisdom and knowledge. Many people learn from your story, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
And we do thank you very much for sharing your story with us, Renee. As you say, there are so many stories out there, and I have yet to read or hear or see anyone that has the same experience. Everyone is different. Everyone goes through a different situation. Even though the places may be the same, their experience may be totally different from everybody else's.
Emotionally,
so thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, thank you. Anyone else? Last chance. Okay, one last question, and then we're going to move on to the lessons really quick because we have right now gone almost our full hour. So we have, when the Germans came to your house during the war, how much of a warning did you get before they came in? Did they knock? Did they pound on the door, or did they just open the door and come in? Did somebody warn you ahead of time?
All of those, all of the above. They would not knock politely. They barged in. They might have been banging, but they would barge. Sometimes it was a little like telephone. I mean, nobody had a telephone. We didn't have electricity or anything, but not because Holland was so developing world, but because of war. Right. So it was a human telephone. The neighbors might say, the Germans are coming. And then they would throw me in a bed upstairs and cover me with blankets and say I had TB. But if they came quickly and just took us by surprise, they threw me in a corner in the living room or wherever we were with the dunce cap. And Jewish children are not necessarily dark. There is nothing like, race doesn't exist, number one. There is no such thing. But we could have blonde hair, we could have red hair, we could have dark hair. But there are many Jewish people with dark eyes and dark hair. Yeah. I went into a large boned blonde family and I was very small boned and very dark. So it was for all our benefit that they could cover my hair up and not draw attention. And so it varied. And often we had to, well, that was in bombings. We ran into a shelter, but it wasn't a real shelter. Anyway.
Okay. All right. The last one that we have is wanting to know, have you written a book or anything about your experience? Or has it just been the spoken oral testimony that you have given that's been written down for the North Carolina Council, the Survivors Bureau, and I believe your testimony is at the Holocaust Museum in DC, correct?
I gave testimony to the museum, but just at that time, they were very low on funds. So I don't know what they have about me. However, someone has written, which has been incorporated, again, much of that article. I have never written a book. Almost everybody I know has written a book. But again, the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust has reprinted in a large, I mean, it was Marion Wason who did such a superb job. And they took this from, it was in a literary journal about the Holocaust from Yeshiva University. And they put out a journal once a year. And my story appeared in that. And I know they got special permission because it was the longest piece of writing they had ever accepted. So I have no plans to write anything myself.
Okay.
You know what, one of the big lessons of growing up Catholic was do not draw attention to yourself. That we have to be humble and modest, and it's never about us. So I'd be the last one to write a book.
Well, thank you for sharing your story orally with us. We do so appreciate it. Thank you very much.
I thank you all, Stacy, Amy, every one of you for inviting me and having me.
Your story is so important to share. And like you said, in today's world, it's more important than ever.
It's very relevant again, sadly.
Very okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we're a little bit after 8.
I'm sorry. I will say goodbye.
No, I'd rather just listen to you and forget the rest of the stuff that these resources to take home with them. So, but we do appreciate, you're more than welcome to stay on because I'm going to share them the link that actually goes to the Holocaust teacher book that you were showing us. If you want to stay on, fine. If you want to log off, go do whatever, feel free.
I very much want to stay for a little while, but I have another obligation. So then I will just quietly leave.
Stacy, before we go to that, Mike Abramson has actually joined us in our meeting, and I think he'd like to say something about the passing of the budget. So can we let him say that first before Renee leaves?
Okay. Send it to Mike. Yes, thank you.
Renee, I only caught the last 15 minutes. I'm so sorry. I was actually on the phone with the chief of staff at Senator Berber's office, who sponsored the Senate bill for the last 35 minutes. So what we have today is a momentous day for everybody. We have mandated state Holocaust education that is now law. We're going to be writing a curriculum for middle school and high school teachers if they want to talk about the Holocaust for 20 minutes or an hour or for 2 days or for a full semester. And then we're going to present this curriculum to all relevant teachers in the state to train them. And this is in addition to what the Holocaust Council is doing now. And we're going to be working with NCAT and NCDPI. We're organized under NCDPI to do this around the state. It's quite a big job, and we'll have a lot of visibility. And I think it's just a momentous day that hopefully we can change the lives of many students. Now, involved in that curriculum, we do have Renee's experience. I don't like to call a Holocaust story. My mother taught me that when you mention story to someone from Eastern Europe, story is like a fantasy or fairy tale. But we do have survivor testimony from survivors who lived in North Carolina. We have 45 testimonies that we have in a guide selection book. Renee's is prominent. She's a fantastic, fantastic speaker. And I'm just so privileged you spoke with us tonight, Renee. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see a lot of friendly faces on our Zoom, many I know from the council, but it's a momentous day, a momentous, beautiful day. Just want to say that. Thank you, everybody.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Mike. And it is a very important day. I'm doing the happy dance. This is something that I know that many people, especially Mike, you and your family and the Holocaust Council, y'all have been working towards this date for years. So thank y'all for your hard work. So I am going to try to share and if you guys look in the chat, I have shared some links over there. We will also be sharing them in an email to you guys in the next couple of days. But I'm going to try to share my screen first time, so bear with me. See how this goes. Well, that didn't go because I forgot to close the chat first. Screen. Here we go. Let's try it now. Desktop. Here we go. Okay, so this is what I shared on the chat. Can you guys see the screen? It says resources and lessons. So Amy or Juanita, Renee, anybody want to jump in and let me know, make sure it's on there?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so the first one comes from the North Carolina Civic Education Consortium, and it is about Renee's video that you guys have seen. And if you click on it, it will take you to this lovely 30-page document. It has different ideas that you can use. But if you're limited in time, and teachers, I know how it is when if you're a history teacher, you don't have as much time to spend as I was a high school English teacher, so I could teach what I wanted to as long as I did the concepts. So, but this is an activity at the end that goes over the video that you could just pull and use just with the video for an activity for a limited number of days. And it does have the link to the YouTube video here. So that is one of the resources that I have for you guys. But like I said, that has plenty of other resources. Now, this is the one that is involved with the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust Teacher Resources. So if you go here, not only will you find links to the book that Renee was showing you, but also this is our current page, and it has other resources. You can go to the workshops on the Holocaust over here. So a lot of different things to help you out. So this is the homepage for the teacher resources for the North Carolina Department of the Holocaust. North Carolina Council on the Holocaust. And this is the teacher's guide. It is on the same website. I just included the separate link so you would know what goes where. But this is the online version of what Renee was holding up a few minutes ago, and you can see that it is broken down into different sections. The one with Renee, where she is mentioned, is in chapter 6, and it has, once again, a different, gives you some background information, different things that were going on with rescuers from different countries. You see Oscar Schindler's mentioned, the St. Louis is mentioned, and then we come with the hidden children. And if you scroll down a little bit, it will give you the lesson. And this is about, not only does it have Renee's, but it has Shelley and Rachel, Shelley Weiner, and Esther Goodman Letterman. She was the last part. So there's 3 different stories, situations here that are described in this one. And once again, it has different questions, different ideas that you can use with this one. I will tell you that the greatest thing about the North Carolina Council on the Holocaust online resources, the supplemental materials, particularly if you're a new teacher teaching the Holocaust, or maybe you're an old teacher and you're teaching the Holocaust and you want to know how your kids, where are they? You know, what do they know? This Holocaust fact and fiction quiz, and then it has the answers, is a great way to find out kind of where they are, so you can meet them where they are. It also has, with the Holocaust Museum, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has the pedagogy. Why should you teach this? Why simulations should not be used. So this also is, even though it's not geared towards Renee's story in particular, this is something that you can hit all the time. And then the last one, if you want to go more into rescuers and or resistance, I included a link to Echoes and Reflections. With their website here, they have a lot of different lesson plans that you can use. This one in particular is Rescuers and Non-Jewish Resistance. And you fall down, it has a lot of different activities that you can use that depending on what time you have. And it has all the resources that you need. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. Everything is there for you. You can tweet. They say you are fully licensed to use their information as well as that of the Council on the Holocaust. So everything that we have here, everything that I have you there has been freely given to you teachers to take and use as you can and as you need. And we're here also to help you with anything. I am the Regional 8 Director, volunteer for the Holocaust Council of North Carolina. So any resources I can help y'all with, just hit me up. I'll be glad to do anything and everything. Jared has shared something also. Thank you, Jared. So that's it for me, and I'm going to turn this over to Juanita. She has some closing remarks and stuff for you guys, and I just want to say thank you. Thank you to Renee. I know she's already left, but thank everybody for being here and for everything that you do. You are much appreciated.
So Stacy says it's back to me. Jared, if you'll share that screen for me, what I need to do, guys, is very, very quick, because I appreciate your time, and we know we went a little bit over, and I understand your time is valuable, especially right now, what teachers are going through now. But I promised my cohort Karen I would go over this. So one of the things I want to make sure that you guys know is on our webpage, the same webpage where you probably went to register for this workshop, you can see all of our upcoming stuff for the rest of November and December. And there may also, there's some new stuff for the spring. Karen and Laurie are doing an in-person workshop next week. And then in December, some teachers in Raleigh, I think if Melanie's still here, they're going to be doing this Anne Frank and Salvage Pages online workshop. So we encourage you to register for any of those you'd like to. Also tonight, here you see what you saw tonight. There is a link on our webpage for you to evaluate the webinar. We'd appreciate it if you would do that. The evaluations help us a great deal to know what it is you need and what it is we can help you with. And I want to echo what Stacy said. Guys, I'm a retired teacher. I'm teaching part-time in college, but I am working with student teachers, and I have a lot of really close friends who are teachers. And I know that it's tough times for you guys. So we appreciate everything that you're doing, all that you're doing for kids, all the time that you're giving. I hope you're taking some time for yourself because it's really important. And we are here as a resource to help you as much as possible. So please give us feedback on the webinars and give us feedback on anything that we can do to help you. Jared, if you'll go back to our full screen, I just want to see if we can close that. If there's anything, Mike, that you want to say before we let the teachers go. No, we're good. So we do appreciate it.
I just want to echo, teachers are the greatest in this country. You're the rock of the community. And I thank you all so much for doing what you're doing. Thank you. Hello, Amy. I see you there.
But thank you guys. Thank you for your time. And we hope to see you at another webinar soon.